here. A very good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for week 14, yes, week 14 of the Exports Recovery Panel Survive to Thrive webinar. It is a weekly webinar by New Zealand's exporters for New Zealand's exporters, as together we navigate our way through COVID towards greater prosperity for ourselves and our businesses, our communities, and of course for our country. In Auckland, from Catapult, I'm Andy Mitchell, and that handsome devil on the square next to me on the screen is Mr. Hamish Conway. Hamish, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Andy.
Yeah, good man.
Very good.
Now today, again, we've absolutely delighted to be joined by some amazing panelists to give us a perspective, not just from one continent, but from two, or in fact even three, depending how our conversation goes today. And as you'll know, if you've been following the series, what we've been trying to do is to bring you the latest perspective of what's happening in different places and different topics that are of interest to the wider export community, because as we all grasp by now, that the best way that we can get through this is to get through it together as a community and as a community of New Zealand businesses as well. So without further ado, if you are joining us, do drop a good day into the chat, or drop us a response to Hamish's poll that's up there around the conference, just to give us an idea of how you're feeling and how business is tracking for you. But I'm going to turn and say a very good morning to our panel, who I'm just so incredibly grateful that you joined us at the end of another busy week. So I'm going to say kia ora to Royal. Kia ora, good morning. Royal, could you introduce yourself please to the audience?
Royal, you're on mute.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Royal from Auckland, and I'm a practicing lawyer that deals with Asian investors mostly.
Fantastic. Royal, thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have you on board. I'm just going to turn to Kenneth. Ken, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Kenneth Leong, and I'm a director shareholder of a number of businesses across various sectors. On the export front, we've been quite busy with meal, and we make face masks for global markets, and yeah, things have really taken off over the last couple of months.
Yeah, this is a little bit of an understatement. Right place, right time, and we look forward to hearing more about that as we go through this morning. Ken, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us. Over to NZTE, Mike. Good morning. Welcome to the panel.
Kia ora, Andy. Kia ora tātou. So, Mike Arand, I'm Business Development Advisor for the Greater China region for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, based in Auckland, running a China team from there. Our team covers mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. Prior to that, I was with the New Zealand Trade and Enterprises Trade Commissioner in Shanghai for 4 years. And before that, I've had business development, sales, operational roles for New Zealand companies, taking brands and products globally across Asia, Europe, North, South America, South Africa, Russia, Middle East, and so on. For me, that global business has been across spectrums, digital, wholesale, retail, franchising, licensing, across different models, across different sectors. So thanks for having me on the panel today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. It's great to have you on. And last but not least, Stuart. Stu, kia ora, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Hamish. I'm Stuart Webster. I'm a Kiwi lawyer turned California attorney. After 24 years in a 10-partner Hawke's Bay law firm, I had an opportunity to obtain a green card and move to the United States on a permanent basis. And I had obviously the choice of becoming a grumpy old partner and improving my golf handicap. Incidentally, that would mean I'd have to actually learn golf to improve it. Or go and find some new challenges. And I call it my rocking chair moment. There I am, aged 95, on the front veranda of my retirement villa, thinking back about opportunities. And at 54, I had the opportunity to go to the United States. Would I regret it if I didn't take the opportunity? And the answer was absolutely straightforward. So I retired from my partnership 5-6 years ago and moved to Los Angeles, took the California bar, and I've retained my New Zealand practicing certificate. So I call myself a cross-border consultant. And in that capacity, I'm helping Kiwi entities either establish themselves in the US, or if they're there already, expand further into the US, and in the spirit of reciprocity, helping Americans come to New Zealand and invest, whether it's OIO or other aspects. So I'm hugely privileged to constantly meet entrepreneurs from both sides of the Pacific.
It's fantastic to have you with us today, Stu. Thanks for joining us. And that doesn't look like California outside. Where are you?
So I'm in Napier, New Zealand. It's a long story, and I'll give you a short version. I came ostensibly to see my dad, who's 92, in a rest home facility. Then the pandemic happened. I couldn't see my dad because he was in full lockdown, as he should be. Air New Zealand bumped our flights a couple of times, and we took a long view to say, well, let's stay. And then my partner suffered a fracture of her tibia and fibula a couple of Saturdays ago doing some 80s dance steps. So our stay's now been extended for 6 to 8 weeks, but not a bad place to be. As I said before, it's relatively COVID-free and riot-free in New Zealand. So yeah, this is an eco tree behind me. So I'm definitely in Tauranga.
It's the real deal. Close to the nicer place to follow, I can't imagine. So close to great wine and to great food. We've got to put a pin in the globe and actually start this conversation. And I think we might head the conversation towards China, if we may, because plainly there's been an awful lot happening there in the last couple of weeks. Mike, if I can start with you, please. I mean, we've seen fresh outbreaks of COVID coming through and a lot of activity in the last week or 10 days in and around Beijing. Is there anything which we should be aware of or that Kiwi exporters should be responding to about this fresh outbreak and this fresh wave?
So just on the outbreak, I suppose if you look at it, it was almost 2 months with no detected community transmission. And then just over a week ago, I think it was, or there was a new case discovered at the Shinfadi market, wholesale market. But what we saw was the local authorities were very, very quick to put some measures in around that, wrap around it. Since then, there have been over 200 cases. But effectively, what you've seen is almost like a return to the conditions in Beijing that were there during the COVID peak in China. They've closed other markets. I think it's about 11 other markets have closed, disinfected 300 other markets around. What we have seen, I guess, is a consumer reaction that's a little bit concerning, and that straight away consumers are starting to spread messages saying potentially fresh or chilled or frozen food might not be safe. That's had a bit of an impact, and that's driving, of course, the distributors or the buyers to turn back to the New Zealand exporters and say, we'll just slow things down for a little bit. I see that as short term, though. I think I'll get on top of that pretty quickly, as China has throughout this whole COVID situation. And very quickly we'll see resumption to trade. But at the end of the day, as I said, a lot of it will be driven by consumers and consumer demand. And at the moment, that demand's slightly down, but it'll pick up again soon.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's actually a lot of the opportunity here is based upon people's perception of security in itself. And Royal, if I just turn to you for a second, please. I mean, it's like the Chinese authorities have demonstrated their ability to get on top of the medical outbreak incredibly efficiently. But as we go forward, I guess we're dealing with the reality of continual pockets of instability. So it's like as a major trading partner, should we still look upon China as being a point of stability inside the region, and are they leading the rest of that region in their response to getting economics back on track?
Well, my observation is China has become rather fragile in many levels, and it's just not COVID wasn't even the driver for it. But in terms of our engagement with China, whether it is the outbound capital from China or our Kiwi business engaging, we are such a small player. So, whatever the market is doing, the ability of us taking advantage of the market was limited. And we are also therefore less impacted, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so far, in some of the investment that we've seen, and some of the good examples that we've seen, the more creative and more innovative your idea and product is, and even in your service offering, the less likely that you are going to be affected. Because China is very strong in political control, but political control is only over area that they understand. That's why over the last 20 years, those people that made it and moved their capital out were those in, say, tech sector. Because for centuries, China government didn't understand tech. So that's the least regulated area. So at the moment, it is about, the government is all over the energy sector, the government is all over the real estate sector, but the more innovative and creative you are, the least likely you are going to be impacted.
So what we're seeing then is this is certainly not a level playing field for all sectors. I mean, Mike, you've got an amazing view from NZTE about where the opportunities are coming through at the present moment. We hear an awful lot plainly about food security and the opportunity for our F&B manufacturers, but which sectors are the ones that are holding China in a very optimistic vein at the moment?
Thanks, Andy. So of course, New Zealand's, for a long time, we've had a very strongly positive reputation for safety and trust. And as you say, that has helped our food and beverage industry, or sector in particular. It seems that if anything, our reputation's probably been enhanced with the way COVID's been managed here in New Zealand. That's the feedback we're getting. I guess just before I talk about other sectors, I'd just like to reiterate the food and beverage sector still has many opportunities to grow. There has been a spike, for example, in fresh food deliveries to the door, and there might be some more opportunities for New Zealand companies to take advantage of there. But I think if you look at things like health and wellness, or sectors like health and wellness, there's obviously been an increase in consumer demand for immune boosting products, and many of the New Zealand companies have benefited from that. For some time, we've seen continuing interest in our innovative manufacturing sectors, companies, for example, that produce baggage handling and weighing solutions for airports, companies that provide technical solutions for agriculture. And we've seen continued demand through the COVID outbreak. We've got Kenneth here from Mio Mask, a great example of an innovative and arguably disruptive change in masks. We're in a market sector which was dominated by cheap paper masks, and they've come in and brought in a high value mask and added a fashion element to it. You have other sectors, for example, where things like pet food, which has been growing very strongly and has seen fantastic growth during the COVID sector. In the service sectors, you've got players like Les Mills, who had been doing well and again have really picked up in the COVID sector. They were very quick to react and give at-home programs for people. Gaming as well, there are opportunities there, and gaming has taken off with the stay-at-home in COVID, so we expect that there are going to be more opportunities in gaming. Film is another example where we had been working well in China. Now that might be a little bit impacted in the short midterm with travel, but there are still huge opportunities to develop there. So many opportunities really. It's a challenge really is how do we capitalize on those opportunities in what is a very, very highly competitive market, and it's likely to be difficult to travel there in the short term. So that's probably the challenge that we have to look at, and how do we overcome that?
There are huge challenges, and we're going to touch on them in detail a little bit later on this call. Just turning to you, Ken, for a second, if I may. Amongst your many interests, you're also the chairman of the Asia and New Zealand Business Council, and we're just really interested. We're hearing some amazing stories from that part of the region, particularly from Vietnam, around very similar patterns of control and eradication to New Zealand. Where are the success stories currently in the Asian group of countries, and where should we be looking to potentially for the start of some fresh relationships?
Sure. So the across ASEAN, certainly we see the response to COVID actually differ from country to country, but certainly Vietnam has been a success story, managed to get on top of things quite quickly, much like China. And so across the other countries, to be honest, I mean, the long-term prospects are bright, and a couple of factors are quite helpful. The fact that most of the ASEAN countries have quite young populations, significant domestic market, and so the recovery is going to be arguably quicker. So the other thing is that a lot of these countries have, taken I guess, moved quite quickly, and the lockdowns are quite common across the board. The long term, I think there's significant potential for New Zealand exporters to look at ASEAN as a complementary market, and so not have all our eggs in one basket. Just diversify, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there with Vietnam's in particular as being on a path to perhaps open relationships faster, is there any part of the ASEAN region which we should be looking to for alternative markets if we're finding parts of our existing portfolio inaccessible due to
sure. Because I think the requirement or demand across various markets would depend on the stage of development. And for example, I mean, Singapore is very advanced, so the types of services and products they demand are quite different. Just to look at some specific examples, there is certainly opportunity for us to open up the international education sector to Vietnam. I mean, you mentioned Vietnam, and they've managed to get on top of this. And when we think about forming bubbles, we are only talking about Australia and the Pacific. So there are a number of other countries, who've done a good job getting on top of this. And the sooner we open up in a controlled manner, of course, with quarantine, testing, and everything else, the sooner we open up, the better. And there's a significant demand for the education services. And when you look at other New Zealand's competitors in that space, there most of the other countries, you look at the UK, the US, and so forth, it's tricky. So we're well placed to do more in that space and gain an advantage over our competitors.
So just quickly, when we're touching on this, I mean, you do have in particular some very deep experience in the education sector. Education is going to be based upon access and trust in the coming months coming through. What do you think New Zealand has an edge over, say, Australia in being able to rebuild that trust that this is the country?
Yes, I think so, because New Zealand's actually viewed upon very positively around the world. So it's not just specific to these countries in Southeast Asia. And because we have such an amazing profile, I think around the world, everyone knows that we've managed to tackle this in a way that demonstrates leadership, and we're giving a lot of people confidence that we know what we're doing. And so we really, I mean, this is like a timely for us to look at, how we capitalize on this opportunity. And certainly, I mean, more needs to be done in terms of just ensuring that everyone follows the rules. And in this regard, I think China has actually done an amazing job just getting on top of things. I mean, no one would be able to escape quarantine, for example, or, so taking a very, I guess, strict approach to things would demonstrate further confidence. And I can't see any reason why we can't allow specific cohorts of students to come through, undergo testing and quarantine, and allow them to, get into classes.
Thank you. Just Royal, for just turn to you for some comments on that. So, I mean, plainly, this is like the education sector is a huge opportunity, and to rebuild what was there before from China. Are you optimistic about our ability to make that sector grow again? Can we rebuild the trusts and the connections fast enough with mainland China to make that happen?
Well, I don't think the trust has ever really been lost. It's just simply a lot of distraction because of the COVID. And there's some frustration because people's plans had to be changed or delayed. And in fact, I have been talking with a number of parties in this space where they were so eager to maintain the attraction with their future reinstated plans with education opportunities in New Zealand, that they were crying out loud for some sort of internet offering on a more long-term basis, even if it becomes an unavoidable reality that some parts of the country, students from those parts will be probably the last group to be allowed back in, for example. So I think there is definitely a lot of room for maintaining that traction or even growing the future opportunity if we manage that.
Again, like you said before, it comes down to the heightened innovation around it in order for us to get a competitive edge in that space. Just going to turn, it's like when we're talking about building bridges and instability, I just want to turn to you, Stu, quickly, please, for your perspective from the US. I mean, plainly, from what we're hearing down the wires, there's a huge amount of instability and an attitude at the government level that's moving towards protectionist. What are you experiencing around the intent and the feeling with the entrepreneurs that you're working with for future investment into the US?
Okay, so I kind of categorize this into highlights and hurdles. I am fortunate enough to act for a couple of dynamic meat companies selling up to the US, and the pandemic's given them an amazing opportunity. A lot of the processing facilities in the US have been seriously impaired because they can't do the distancing for the process workers, and the COVID infections have rocketed within those plants and it's causing all sorts of problems with the food supply chain. So New Zealanders being nimble and flexible and able to solve problems, there's a real gap for these meat processors in New Zealand to send product up. In fact, I'm told that every single carcass they can get hold of, they can sell it up into the United States and at a reasonable clip. I think the difficulty for them is in the logistics area, with the airlines being impaired also. They can't get their products up there quickly and cheaply, and that's certainly having an impact. And I know that they say with airlines, it's a closed market on wings. As soon as you close the aircraft door, you can't make another dollar out of it. So I get that, and there are some challenges, and I'm sure that's been discussed in previous panel sessions. Another highlight is I act for a client who's in the engineering construction space. Just prior to the pandemic exploding in the US, they were doing the tour of trade shows, and they had basically filled their books with orders, and that was fantastic. And they were coming back basically on the same day that I came to New Zealand in the middle of March, and then everything changed. Everyone's wallets closed, all those orders just disappeared overnight. It was disconcerting for them. But as the US has been pushing to open up in some ways prematurely, there are states like Texas, like Ohio, and like Washington have gone gangbusters. And this particular client of mine is absolutely ecstatic because the order book is filling up again. They got 8 new orders just during this week. So they're really, really thrilled with that. From a political point of view, and if I can talk about the hurdles, we discussed earlier that the Dixie Chicks, for goodness sake, have to change their name and drop Dixie because of its Confederate overtones. And the group of 2 women in the 1960s here, the Chicks obviously would have had perhaps an IP claim, but in between our panel session earlier and now, stuff is just advertised or at least posted that the Chicks here in New Zealand have given permission for the Dixie Chicks to use the name The Chicks. So I feel as if I've been edged out of a job. But, let's just briefly talk about the hurdles. This week, the US president signed a proclamation that put a stop to all immigrants going in on H1. That's the tech sector, H2, which is seasonal agricultural, the J1, which is the student intern visa category, and also L visas, which impact Kiwis most importantly because it's the intra-company transfer of staff here to subsidiaries or branch offices in the US. And that is right through to the end of this year and can be renewed depending on how things pan out. Now that's a serious problem because, as Guy Horrocks said in the previous panel last week, there is a real need in the United States to be on the ground and have a legal presence there, and to staff your US operation with Kiwis as best you can. So we can't be doing any more applications for L visas. Thankfully, though, E1 treaty trader and E2 treaty investor categories are still open. There, I suppose the rationale is that people can sustain themselves because they have a business or they have an investment, they have money, and they're not taking American jobs necessarily, because the whole of the president's proclamation is predicated on the fact that they want to save US jobs for US citizens as best they can in a time when there's unprecedented unemployment. So that's going to be a challenge, and I think that Kiwis, if we look forward to what should happen the next 6 months or so, getting up there is going to be problematic. I think Kiwis are going to have to rely on existing networks and Kiwis on the ground. Mike Hearn last week said that there's a whole host of CEOs who want to hop on a plane and come back to New Zealand for obvious reasons. But there are Kiwis who are intent on staying up there and helping out. So I'm going to be one of those. I'm not there yet, but in 6 weeks' time, hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be hunkered down in LA and business as usual. So, yeah.
Yeah, on top of that, so this just it's like, Mike, from your perspective inside NZTE, or plainly for a different region, do you think that this is going to this throttling of visas, so the slowing down of visas, will have a material impact in our interest as a country into the US, because it's a barrier that's just set a little bit too high?
Into the US or into China?
Into the US from Stu's example, but we'll touch on China in a second.
Yeah, look, very hard to say how it's going to pan out, but it seems likely that in the next 6 months or so, we're going to see very limited travel. I guess where we're seeing the impact at NZTE is from companies who want to send their representatives into market. Because ultimately, as much as we can do this sort of Zoom call and talking online, a lot of things still have to be concluded face to face. And that's where we're seeing some companies really struggle to say, how are we going to do this if we can't get into the market? In the case of China, they did come through with special exemptions for visas, but unfortunately, they were very hard to get. We have heard of a few individuals who have managed to get the special exemption visa, but fairly limited. So I think that's going to continue for the next 6 months, struggle to get in there. And then it's a question of, well, if you can't get into the market yourself, what are the resources in the market that you might be able to use to fulfill those obligations or fulfill those duties that you're trying to do?
Yeah, and that's it's like when you're riding a wave, it's actually quite hard to be able to move fast enough. I mean, Ken, see, it's like you've been in the extraordinary position as having a successful face mask business before COVID broke out. So plainly, the demand for your product has gone through the roof. How's your business managed to be able to match that demand and to grow so successfully, but without the ability to be face to face or to put new people on the ground in the right place? What's it been like from Gravity?
Okay, look, we've been quite fortunate in that we have a significant number of people in China. So we have an office in Auckland and an office in Xiamen. So the two directors in our business, and so our managing director and the majority shareholder of the company is based in China. And so we have a team there, and we have a factory in Xiamen and one in Auckland. We basically have everything set up pre-COVID, right? If we're trying to sort of do it now, because there's customer demand, and then we start putting all these things together, it just simply wouldn't work. You just have to have people on the ground. Now, I just have to commend NZTE as well. I mean, in other markets where we don't have an office and people, boots on the ground, we've relied quite a bit on our NZTE BDMs. Now, of course, I mean, we're a Focus 700 company, so we do get quite a bit of support. But the NZTE has been really good, and the BDMs have stepped up over the last couple of months in helping us reach out and talk to customers, and I mean engage in a like a deeper manner, right? So now, just in terms of how we make things happen on the ground, it's important to have if it's not your staff, right, like not employees, have trusted intermediaries, right? Like this could be distributors or trusted contacts or shareholders, or some like a cousin or an uncle of someone in Auckland or something like that, right? Like you have to have someone there. Trying to do this remotely over Zoom, very tricky.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've learned. I mean, unless you have all that set up. I mean, sometimes we waste a lot of time. I mean, you can waste a lot of time, on Zoom calls, and you just never get anywhere, right? So you might as well focus on the few markets or few areas where you do have stronger connections and you're going to close. Then you don't spend as much time spinning wheels.
So this means you're almost paring back on your opportunities to focus on the ones where you have the greatest strength. If I understand you correctly. So Royal, I mean, when it comes to closing deals and brokering deals, I mean, plainly you're heavily involved in that. Are you seeing a slowing down in the completion of deals? Are people stepping back because they just can't be they can't be close enough to people and they can't build the trust to be able to get to a point of a final commitment?
Well, in traditional sectors, yes, where a lot of Chinese organizations continue to rely on very senior decision makers that have a more traditional way of confirming their reading of the situation and reading of their new partners. That's being delayed because they feel everything looks good until I come and meet you. So when we are in the COVID environment, they had to be logically delayed. But there are obviously some sectors where deals are able to be more progressed without perhaps waiting for that face-to-face. Or I have seen some more successful arrangements where they put in some sort of trial runs and a limited capacity sort of rolling out their agreement in part and not in full, and only roll out the full agreement until they have the two heads meet face to face. And that had been a little bit of a preserving factor if you have things that you really need to move and you really don't know when the door is going to open again. And but in many sectors, especially in the service sector, we are seeing a quicker decision being made because previously it would have been nice to meet, but when you are delivering service, there's no hindrance in terms of how you meet. So some of the people are actually, in my experience, making decision faster because you won't be meeting for a long time. So there's no point in delaying that conversation. We should just get on with it now.
Yeah. So it's like, again, we could just coming back to the sense that everything has changed. Some things are moving faster and some things are being hindered. Some sectors are advancing and some are retreating. It's like all the way through this program, through 14 weeks of it, we've been trying to put down little points of certainty for people to be able to grasp onto, so we can almost use stepping stones to mentally make our way through this. And it appears to me that the only thing that is certain now is uncertainty. So, I mean, just like thinking of us all and everybody on this call as we're all leading individual businesses, I mean, just a question to you, Mike, is, should we now be completely rethinking how we approach our overseas trade, and in particular our trade into markets like China or the ASEAN region that are very heavily dependent upon personal relationships, and almost thinking twice before we commit?
I think from what we're hearing, businesses are exactly doing that, rethinking the whole model. I think too, a lot of our businesses focus a lot on product and come up with innovative product, but perhaps sometimes don't work on the business model. We're seeing and hearing a lot more now with companies trying to figure out what the business model is to make a business successful as well. And so absolutely, people are thinking a lot more shorter term than they were before. I've spoken to a number of businesses who, whilst they might have an annual budget, are pretty much saying, but we're not going to be measured on that. We're going to look at things quarterly and cash flow daily. So things have changed dramatically in that sense. Where I guess the other area, some of the businesses have talked to us and said, and then we're going to keep things a lot closer. So if we're going to export, we might do it within this sort of radius of where eventually when we can travel, we travel within sort of 10 or 11 hours, which is half the world anyway. So it's probably not a bad strategy. So yeah, definitely a lot of rethinking going on and looking at where really those markets of strongest potential are and focusing on those. Yeah. And to your earlier point, narrowing down the focus rather than sort of saying we're going to go and crack the USA and Europe and Japan and China and all these other markets. It's what are the 2-3 markets that we really think we can crack, and putting more focus into those areas, which is pretty pleasing, because for many of our New Zealand companies, we're SMEs, we're small, and we don't really have the resources to tackle multiple markets at the same time. So I think that's actually a good trend. And hopefully we'll continue past this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Focus always pays dividends. Ken, from your perspective, I mean, no matter what 1, 2, or 3 markets you might pick, you're going to markets that are incredibly sophisticated, with increasing pressure upon the channels, and especially the direct to customer channels, which we might be accessing as first-time exporters. It's like thinking about markets such as China. Is there a point that it just becomes too big and too competitive for the average New Zealand SME to compete? Should we be looking elsewhere?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, I have to be frank. I think a lot of New Zealand companies are not set up to succeed in China. And look, I mean, I don't want to sort of demoralize half of you out there, but the fact is that it is bloody hard. It's and getting harder. The point is we're competing with local and foreign. So when I say local, I mean like the local Chinese companies, as well as foreign companies from elsewhere, all looking to China, right, and willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. And sometimes I wonder if our I guess our culture here and psyche and so forth, it could be at odds with this. I'll just give you an example, right? Like I'm on WeChat like 24/7, right? And I get messages at midnight every day, right? And so we're expected, I mean, and Royal and sometimes Mike too, you know, we respond, you know, and it becomes a second nature because I've done this for like so long, right? So I reply, and then sometimes, you know, sales staff, they have a question or whatever, right? A financing structure or whatever, and I have to address this immediately. Now, the part of the reason I think we've managed to close a lot of deals is because we respond fast. Okay, and this is something that I mean, if I have like just a handful of tips, right? You know, sometimes I get asked this, what are some tips? You know, respond fast, like as in on the spot. So fast, not as in fast tomorrow, fast on the spot, like WeChat, whatever, and try to sort of, you know, help your guys out on the ground to actually get the deal closer. The other thing is, look, we were talking about closing deals earlier. Sometimes it's not so good for the directors to be to front up. Of course, I mean, it's useful to progress the deal for the decision makers to meet face to face, but sometimes it's also useful to have your salespeople go out and actually create a buffer. So they go and, you know, discuss all the details. Because look, if I was sitting there, I mean, I'm the person signing the contract, right? If I'm sitting there and they ask me a question and I can't, I mean, there's no room for me to move. You know, if I say yes and I go back and change my mind, it doesn't really work. So sometimes it's taking a team approach, tag team and that sort of thing. And also learning from others, right? Like talking to others who have actually successfully closed a lot of deals, and seeing what's changing. Because, and Mike is right, you know, like things are changing so rapidly. Like, I mean, I look at the example of face masks, you know, PPE, hand sanitizers, prices skyrocketed. Now, we kept our prices constant during the crisis. We didn't take advantage of the situation and ramp it up, but some of the resellers did, right? Like, I mean, so it became like the stock market, you know, the mass prices, you know, were climbing faster than the S&P 500, right? So basically, it's bound for a crash, right? Which is exactly what's happened. So now prices have come right down, and because the Chinese market and other parts of Asia as well, but China in particular, they move really fast, you know, overnight. I mean, you know, you come up with a good idea, you know, someone's bound to sort of replicate that. Point is, they can scale at speed, like at high speed. So you think that you work your numbers and you think that this works, and the next month you go to market, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Because you look on Tmall.com, everything's there. And because it's platforms have democratized access. So anyone can just hop on and basically start selling stuff, right? Like Amazon, eBay, I mean, same thing, right? And so this has created a tension that is, that even in the short time that our business has been around, we've seen such significant changes, and we're trying very hard to kind of keep up and running very fast. But it just seems that it's getting harder by the day.
We're running fast, Ken, but are we fast enough, and are we prepared? I mean, like Mike, from your perspective across so many sectors, you know, are we operating fast enough? Is our MPD pipeline agile enough? are we due quite a significant change in the way that we do business in New Zealand in order to seriously thrive in this new environment?
I think some companies are, but in general, to Ken's point, if you're dealing in markets like China and many markets around the world, not just China, the competition's intense. It's very good. You know, both the domestic competition and imported competition in China is intense. And of course, that's driven not only by the consumers and by the people producing, but take online, for example, the platforms are driving constant change as well. So you've got to be able to keep up. So are we driving fast enough? Sometimes not. I've seen examples where companies have put out products which have been sort of 90% right for the market. Someone else has seen those products on the shelf or online, and they've done some adaptations. That could be format, that could be packaging, but they've changed things around and then taken that market slot that somebody else started building. And so it's just that need to be able to continually change and keep up and come out with new products too. Because even if there is a successful product, what's the next product? Because ultimately someone will find something similar or do something similar. So it's been able to stay ahead of that competition. And I think to your question, we really have to probably put more into that new product development area. But we're all small enterprises, and that comes at a cost. So maybe one of the answers to that is working together more and finding ways of working together to come out with new product development.
So on that, it's like, Royal, from your point of view, it's like what are you learning from the sources of capital from the region who are doing deals through you? Is New Zealand operating at a pace that keeps us in line with what's needed inside the region, or do we need to reset the way that we approach our business?
Well, I think what Mike has commented on and Ken, very much in line with what I have observed, is really it comes down to how are we positioning ourselves in terms of what is the problem that our product is proposing to solve? What is the draw card for a big market where many people are throwing all sorts of solutions at? What are we actually showing the market that we've got something better and different to offer? And whenever our product is in that position, or even our service is in that position of a uniqueness and creative advantage, then suddenly you are inundated with capital offers and opportunities your way. But if you are just joining the crowd to try to replicate or slightly change the look of something that you know has been going well, China market is very fast to evolve, and probably when it comes to copying anything good, well, we won't be fast enough for any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the it's that we almost need to up our game and get back to basics in some way. If you correctly,
simple, effective, creative, yes,
and to do things first.
Yeah, look, Andy, can I just say that a massive constraint for New Zealand small business SME exporters is a shortage of capital. All right, and the thing is, this whole bootstrapping approach and all that. I mean, you know, understand that all of us have done that, but it's increasingly not very workable. By the time you come up with a minimum viable product, you try to test it, you try to go, it's too slow, you know. Capital helps accelerate success. And so, I mean, to win in China these days, I think it's not about coming up with the perfect product. I think it's coming up with a product that's sort of, you know, good enough, and get out there and move at pace. So this is something I've learned across a number of companies I'm involved with, and we pride ourselves in New Zealand on quality, 100% New Zealand pure, and all that. I mean, look, all that's valid. I mean, strong New Zealand story and all that. But I alluded to this earlier: the importance of pace and how you actually supercharge things. I mean, really is with capital. I think the opportunity is for us here, especially in Auckland, to have communities like the local Chinese community, other Asian communities as well, but local Chinese community to work together with our aspiring exporters and partner up. Okay, so it's like a win-win thing, you know. And although I'm starting to see more of such ventures, not enough. You know, we need to do so much more. Have best of both worlds. I mean, a quarter of our city today is Asian. And to me, this is a massive missed opportunity. Why are we not getting more people together Now, I mean, Royal and me, I mean, we're fairly integrated. I mean, we're doing our bit to sort of integrate. And Mike does a really good job. He's well known in the Chinese community and, trying to pull people together. But all of us need to be in this together. Let's leverage what we've got here in terms of both capital and connections.
It's such an inspiring thought. I mean, this is the collaboration that Mike was alluding to before that we need, but almost informal collaboration as well as formal collaboration. How do we? It's like, because like through a crisis, things happen, and Kiwis, although we may not be moving as fast as we should be, we're still good at building things from the ground up. So in terms of building those connections, what tools and networks are at our disposal, Royal, to be able to start to move closer to these sources of potential partnership and capital that aren't overseas but are actually right here in our own cities?
Yes, I totally agree with Kenneth. We have for many, many years a very strong immigration policy that has already drawn for most of our clients that invest between 3 to 10 million on a monthly basis to comply with these requirements. And for the purpose of those compliance, the capitals have long become based in New Zealand. And in fact, many of them are scratching their heads and going around everywhere to find things to invest in that would allow them to feel they are part of a New Zealand story, and also to find something that's perhaps not so accessible for their Chinese competitors who also have capital and want to look at opportunities. And we have a lot of established channels of influence in Auckland that reach the Chinese audience in New Zealand. And in fact, a lot of these investor migrants, I was talking to one recently, they do not look at anything apart from these Chinese platforms because that is their source of information. And if you are looking at a product that's potentially targeting the Chinese audience, both domestically and internationally, they will be your easy source of feedback as well as a test. And with a good feedback, you probably already have what it takes for them to be sounding the trumpet for you. And potentially you'll have people that would already want to approach you and talk about what they can see, how you could improve your product or partner with them for.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? That an overseas trade bridge actually starts with building bridges at home and connecting to the people. So much
is here.
Yeah. The smallest bridge first before you go over the ocean. Just Stu, from your point of view, what's the parallels? Because it's like the US and North America are an equally ginormous market with barriers that are getting higher and higher to entry, both physically and from a trade point of view, from protectionism. Is there a parallel here with the way that we should be engaging with the Kiwis in the US or here or American partners? How should we go about building those same collaborative connections for the US market?
Look, Andy, I think if New Zealanders concentrate on doing or producing things that other people can't do or produce themselves, then we'll always have a market. And if I go back to those dynamic meat industry participants, the US can't keep up with their own food supply chain. And New Zealand's already there with product, could easily be swamped. We might have supply chain problems ourselves, but at least we're there, and if we can react and get product into the market, we're doing well. So I think the lesson is, and a parallel with the China experience, is be light, nimble, versatile, do what Kiwis do best, which is jump-starting a Massey Ferguson with the metal shoulder strap of a cheap warehouse handbag. Use bananas and sellotape to get stuff done, and chiming in on what Kenneth says, do it quickly and respond. I don't particularly recommend that Kiwis stay awake at times when the eastern side of the United States wakes up, because that would be just disruptive, I think, to your own personal life. But how you do it, Kenneth, I don't know, waking up at midnight and responding to a WeChat communication. But yeah, look, I think Americans are surprised about how responsive we can be. They don't necessarily understand time zones, but if we can respond within a reasonable time, they're hugely grateful. They like that personal contact. We've got a good brand here. They love our Prime Minister. The number of times people say, you're so lucky to have her, gun control and all the other things, get on top of COVID. I see that the UK, Andy, somebody there suggested that the UK declare war on New Zealand and automatically cede so that the New Zealand Prime Minister would take over from Boris Johnson. You know, are there parallels for President Trump? I don't know.
That's the sort of big thinking that we like on this discussion. It's like, bring it on. Hamish, I'm looking at the clock, and then I'll get into trouble if we run over. It's sounding like the.
We've got a few questions here. Shall we?
And before we wrap up with everybody.
Brilliant. Let's have a look at a couple of the questions here. We've actually got one here from Scott Blythe. I currently export lamb to China. Where do you see consumer demand in China progressing in the next 6 months? My customers in was it Dalian and Zibo are seeing consumer demand as being very weak due to consumer concern around health and their job security. So Mike, perhaps as a starter there, what are your thoughts on that for Scott?
Yeah, thanks Scott for the question. Look, there's a few elements here to consider. As you probably know, if you're in the meat industry, one of the big disruptors at the moment there is the fact that pork has been significantly reduced, and that's pork and chicken, the two biggest sources of meat in China. And that's actually created demand for New Zealand meat. And on top of that, of course, with the trade disruptions between US and China, again, has created demand. So that was all trending very nicely, as you know. And then there is this, I think, temporary concern around imported meat. I think that is temporary, though. I don't think it's going to last forever. And what you've seen, we talked before about Beijing and what's happened there with the recent outbreak. It's been very quickly contained. And from talking to our team in China, we've got a team of around 70 people in China. I think everybody seems fairly confident that things will get back on track relatively quickly. So whilst you might be seeing that sort of dip in consumer demand now, I think that will change, because ultimately consumers still want to get good protein. And if they're struggling to get protein through meat in China at the moment, they will look for imported sources. And they will look to countries like New Zealand. We talked before about the safety and trust reputation that New Zealand has. So I think look at it temporarily. Very hard to say, because who knows what will happen in the next 6 months. But at this stage, I would say that you will be seeing an uptick after we get over this slight sort of downturn caused by the Beijing outbreak.
Good. Well, thank you. Thanks, Mike, there. And then we'll move on to a question here from Richard Elverington. I've actually met this guy, Richard Elverington. Do we have a mechanism that allows small businesses to learn how to launch new products and markets within the restrictions of MPI product claims? So where to point this one here? So is that, again, Mike, maybe back in your direction? Yeah.
So sorry, just Hamish, can you repeat the question? It's a mechanism to...
Yeah, can you also, you might even be able to see the Q&A yourself there. So do we have a mechanism in New Zealand that allows small businesses to learn how to launch new products into, say, China within the restrictions of the MPI product claims? And so I know Richard's in the kind of formula food type of business with dairy and Manuka sort of products.
Yeah, so MPI put out a lot of information on the regulations and what needs to be done in terms of getting the products exported from here. We at NZT, we share quite a bit of information, so I would suggest Richard perhaps contacting us, and we can share the information we have around regulations in China, claims you can make and things like that. The other area that might be worth looking at, I know Plant and Food Research have a program called the High Value Nutrition Program. It'd be really good for you to look into that and see, and they are looking specifically at launching new products there. And obviously they work with MPI and NZT and other entities to make sure that we're launching products that conform to both our regulations and the regulations in China. But maybe just, I'm quite happy if we have a call outside of this and we can get into that a bit deeper.
Yeah, okay. Super. Well, that's good. So, then we've got, well, there is another one there, but I think we actually kind of covered it off in terms of the communication side of things being Zoom over the phone versus in person. So, okay. Well, look, I think given the time, And also we need to talk about what happens next with the, should I cover off on that very quickly, or we can loop around and...
We'll loop around in a second and do that. We're just about on the top of the hour. The key theme that's come out of the conversation today is that if you think it's hard, it's actually got the potential to become harder. It's like, everybody knows me. I'm not a man with optimism written on my shirt, but it's a situation where things are changing and they're changing at pace. And the only way that we can react is to change how we look at this ourselves. So it's kind of, there is a feeling from everybody today that actually we've got to go into this with our eyes open, because there is no easy route for any market anymore, no matter whether you're looking at the US or China or wider in Asia Pacific. So really, it's like I'd like to take the chance to have a few last words with everybody on the panel today, and just look for a feeling, if there is to be a bubble across our region, where would be the most beneficial way to structure that bubble right now? I mean, Ken, from your point of view, have you got a perspective on where your ideal bubble would be for us to take a step towards better connectivity?
Yeah, look, this is a tricky one, because I think we'll keep seeing flare-ups. So the bubble, to me, would be like a dynamic bubble. So, the bubble for a period until there's a flare-up, and then the bubble closes, and then so the point I'm trying to make is that for business people, they'll still be quite concerned about getting up into market, and then last thing you want is to be stuck because the bubble all of a sudden has been temporarily suspended. So there are a number of places with, they've done a good job with tackling this, but I just wonder whether that concept of a sustained bubble is in fact viable.
Yeah, it's a great point. Royal, your perspective on this?
Well, I think we need to think more creatively within our current bubble. We have so many local domestic estate market that many of these products that want to reach that market offshore have not even been fully explored and enjoyed here. There is an untapped potential of all these people ready to be entertained, and it wouldn't cost as much, and it wouldn't come as many risks.
So the idea is to look closer to home for connections and for markets.
Yeah, sell to us first.
Yeah, it's like sometimes the easy route is closer than it might appear. And thanks for your perspective on that, Royal. That's amazing. On the Hamish, I think we should touch on, just before we close off here, touch on some changes to the format of the webinar that you've known and hopefully loved over the last 14 weeks.
Brilliant. So look, for everyone on here, hopefully you've enjoyed this series, and given the way things have moved and where we are at now, in being at level 1 and more business as usual to a degree. What we're going to do is this panel conversation, we're now going to make it monthly. So we'll have around the world in 60 minutes, as it were, and getting different perspectives of what's actually happening in market. So that'll happen once a month. In between, we're going to be interviewing exporters. So the first interview next week will be, it won't be live, we'll put it into various socials and out via email. It'll be with Blunt Umbrellas. So you may recall a couple of weeks back we had, was it Todd from Blunt, and also another guy, Greg, will be interviewing them. And so that'll get the ball rolling. So we'll do that a couple of times a month, and then on the other week we'll have a masterclass, you could say, on a specific area of export that will either be led by like Chris and Andy, or myself if it's more e-commerce, or another organisation, so like the young foodies in the UK. So there'll be those sort of opportunities there. So our goal is to keep on providing you with inspiration and also relevant and timely information. But obviously appreciate everyone's got to be in action and getting work done as well. So that's the plan, and hopefully that'll not hopefully, I'm sure you'll enjoy it, and there's going to be some fascinating interviews, and because on these panels here we can only go so far, but having 20-30 minutes with a specific company is going to be fantastic. So that's the updates there.
And the great news is that we're actually following the advice of the panelists today, and that we're innovating at pace with what we do to reach the domestic market. So I'm doing multiple ticks for that. Hamish, we've done well. So finally, Mike, to you, thank you so much for joining us. It's been amazing to have your depth and breadth of experience from this. Can you just give us a reason to be cheerful, please, about the future prospects of trading with China? A reason to be cheerful.
Oh, look, sure. Look, at the end of the day, despite what's going on at the moment, China's still the market size and still going to develop at a rapid pace, perhaps not at the pace it has over the last decade or two, but it's still going to continue to develop. And for New Zealand, a lot of what China will need going forward, we are producing or will produce, we design. So it's still lots of opportunity there. Certainly going to be a little tricky over the next 6 to 12 months, but I'm very sort of bullish on the future of our trading relationship with China.
That's great to hear. Thanks so much again, Mike. It's lovely to have you with us. Stu, all the way down there from the Hawke's Bay, stroke California. It's been lovely to have you. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Give us a reason to be cheerful about our trading future with the US.
Okay, so no Teflon bubble would be strong enough or big enough to extend to the United States at the current time, but that's just going to be a temporary state of affairs. There's fantastic support up in the US with NZTE and Kia, so a shout out to them. And the way we're going to cope in the meantime is connecting with our networks in the United States and finding Kiwis who can actually help New Zealanders do what they do best, which is sell innovative product up to the US.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your insight there, Stu, and lovely to have you with us. You be good, and we'll catch you very soon, we hope. Ken, it's been lovely having you with us. Thank you again so much for all your perspective and for taking time out to be with us. Have you got a reason to be cheerful?
Lots of reasons to be cheerful. I'm very optimistic. It's look, you know, I think we've been through quite a bit, but if you have a long-term outlook, you know, 2 to 3 years out, 100% certain things will be substantially better.
All right, I'm taking that as a start for 10. It's been lovely having you with us. Hopefully we'll catch you very soon. And over to you, Royal, for the last word on this and the last reason to be cheerful, please.
Well, I think the biggest reason to be cheerful for is COVID has taught everyone, especially those in the China market, what quality means in life and not necessarily quantity. And quality is where New Zealand brands sit, and we've got a great advantage in delivering that.
That's amazing. We're going to take that and hold it as we move faster and more bravely and at pace from next week. Thank you, Royal. It's been lovely having you with us. Hopefully we can get you back on another panel sometime very soon. But in the meantime, it's time for us to go. I'd just like to put a shout out just to our amazing partners who are working tirelessly behind the scenes to help all this to happen, to Mel Lim and Tanya Beardsley at Kia, of course to Sheenal and all the team at NZTE, to Jeremy Hall and the team at MFATs, and to everybody behind the scenes with Cell Global and with Catapults. But from Royal and Kenneth, from Mike, Stuart, Hamish and myself, it's been lovely having this conversation and being with you all again. Watch out, 10 a.m. next Friday, the first long-form interview will be there for you to consume at your leisure, and we'll see you back here very soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye.